Following total atomic annihilation, the rebuilding of this great nation of ours may fall. It is the unfortunate truth that when you go above ground,
Children brother, this will be the first of several lessons to assist you in matching our unconscious and conscious thoughts. Keep in mind this will be a very rushed and compressed lexicon of facts, observation, and leads. Keep in mind this first part could in fact be several hours in and of itself. There are avalanches worth of things known publicly without you or myself needing the author's library to attain. We will be basing them off these things principally throughout these lessons, leads, and observations. Shall we begin? To start, I want you to forget everything from the 1920s downward. All the old paintings, the painting artists, the musicians, the philosophers, the scientists, the politicians, the machinery, and yes, even slavery. Think of what you were taught as an intense fever dream. If you're asking why, I first need to rebuild your mental foundations. Got it? Okay. Now I want you to look at these images. And I would advise you to pause during each one. Interesting. Notice anything? There seems to be a pattern. Where are the people? Again, these are real photos. Once you find someone, they seem out of place, disassociated. They don't belong. I want you to take careful note of their skin color, or lack thereof, in the images with the people. Empty city. At the empty city is the same Greco-Roman design. We will be getting into that term, Greco-Roman, in due time. Gothic. Japan? What's disturbing is that all the buildings all seem to be partly buried, as if half or more of the building is covered in dirt and mud. And of course your eyes don't deceive you. Throughout many of these images, pay attention to the bottom floor, the windows at the bottom of a building going into the ground. as if the building is way taller. I'm going to tell you point blank, not to overextend this video. We, especially us, live in a dead world. What does the term world mean? The term comes into effect when referring to a nation, or rather a nation of people. In the Old Webster Dictionary, as you can see, mainly leads towards that. Commonly, you will find this throughout the Bible. Simply replace the term world with nation in any verse of the scripture and listen to yourself. It ends up being a lot different than what is modernly thought. As I go along, you'll catch on. Tell me something. Is this what the 1800s looks like to you in your mind? How about the 1900s? Probably a lot different, right? If only you knew the amount of money spent on clearing the mud in California, and honestly Earth-wide over the last few centuries. The amount of gold and other precious materials they found, all under that mud. The most peculiar part of these old photos are the buildings. It should be evident to anyone they are digging up pre-built and fully functional structures. There is a clear difference between these wooden structures and then the master masonry. Besides the conscious gymnastics, there really is no way to look at this. Notice how high it is, that is the mud. Keep in mind the street level in comparison to the windows. That should be strange to anyone. Well, they look out of place. Pay attention to the people. Out of place, all pale. That's a lot of doorways that lead to nothing. Do you see any real difference between the game and the photos? This was merely the introduction. Another part of your foundation. How were the old structures made? I'll tell you now. Geopolymer.
These massive blocks have the same chemical makeup and appearance as blocks of the Great Pyramid. The limestone we used consists of fossil shells called nummulities, like those in the Giza bedrock. Like in Giza, our French limestone is so loosely bound it doesn't require crushing. But unlike in Giza, it contains no kaolin clay. We heap the cement additives, lime, natron and kaolin clay, near the limestone. The two components will react in the water and build in situ geological glue, which will then yield the hard geopolymeric rock agglomerated limestone. We start making the cement by mixing sodium carbonate, found in Egyptian natron, and lime in 500 liters of water. We then add the kaolin, inherent to Giza lime, the wooden tool. We dump 1 ton of limestone rubble into the basin and mix it with the cement. Several days later, water has evaporated from the basin, so we remove the disaggregated limestone for making the block. Inspecting the mixture, 95% limestone aggregates and only 5% rock-making binder. Between 12 and 17% of water give it the consistency of wet sand. One squeezes the mixture with his hand and it keeps its shape. This batch will quickly gain strength. We do all of the work manually, forming a human chain carrying buckets from the mixing area to the mold. We pour the limestone concrete mixture in a mold and pack it down with a tool called a rammer. Compacting the material requires little effort. The packing operation encourages cohesion and the denser mixture takes on high strength from the initial curing phase. When the climate is warm and beautiful, our crew rapidly produces a re-agglomerated limestone that proved strong, dense, and true to the plant's size and shape. The mold consists of small wooden boards, which can be reused many times for making other blocks. In this ideal weather, the whole process runs smoothly and is very simple. We remove the mold 4 hours later. The synthetic limestone looks like a natural stone. We observed no trace of wood grain. 4 blocks have already been made. Joseph Davidovits presents them. The 2 large blocks, weighing up to 4.5 tons, containing most water, have given smoother surfaces. The 2 small blocks, weighing up to 1.3 tons, the least wet, take on rougher surfaces. When you look at the stones of the pyramid, this is what you see. You see either smooth blocks or very crude blocks. And we have replicated all these surfaces just by varying the amount of water, which depends on the climate, it depends on the weather. Joints between blocks are also perfect.
Just think of them as cast clay, or clay-like concrete that hardens after exposure to air. Once hardened, It makes this beautiful, enduring, heavy weather resistant structure, leagues superior to modern concrete. On the image on the upper left, pay attention to the pinch marks on the walls. The pinch means the material was fed through that spot on the spot. You would be surprised how much cast there are. For instance, England? Yes, that is completely or near completely man-made. Now back to Egypt, or what they call Egypt. Pay attention to the broken structures at the bottom. Pay attention to the pillars. Notice that the detail seems to be missing or have come off. The statues on the ground are clearly new, and this is clearly a reconstruction, even from what they have attained. It still appears that the pillars are blank. Notice that pinch mark at the ear of this quote-unquote sphinx. Also notice the difference in material. Just the head is seemingly newer, while the bottom is older. It means that the person that made the head part, well, did it recently, but not as recently as we think. You can tell, well, by the obvious broken nose, that the person that made it was clearly colored, and the person they're, well, representing is also colored, so of course the nose had to go. Yet it's still evident that that head part is unnatural to the body. Pay attention to the back behind these modern hieroglyphics. Notice how it's coming off? Because the original structure was, well, pretty smooth before the editing. And I'm very much saying it. Those hieroglyphics, those bird people you see, that's of a modern creation. That was never there. Matter of fact, the pyramid never looked like that before. We'll get into that a little bit later on. In the not too distant past, every master crafter generally used this on-the-spot method of squeezing and compressing malleable mixtures. In the Earth's current state, I'm going to assume you think this rock is a natural formation. I can tell you it's not. Look closely. Interesting. They would have you calling pyramids mountains, rocks, stones, or even boulders. Don't get caught up in the ocean rift. Where do all the structures seem to be buried or worse? Another part of your foundation. Remember when I mentioned to you personally that one day, outside at your work, it's as if everyone of Jacob died in year 800. Oh, sorry, 1800s. For you, of course. Keep in mind these two verses. They'll become more relevant as we go along throughout the series. The first one was removed from the Old Testament, for reasons, of course. Anything out of the ordinary? The photo from the 1900s says Anno DCCCXC, which means the year 890. But today it says Anno MDCCCXC, which means the year 1890. 1,000 years were cast onto the building. Remember, while watching this series, forget everything from the 1920s downward, because for you and I, it's as if someone is trying to subvert our reality. On occasion, you'll find certain out-of-place dates if you know what you're looking for. Your eyes are not deceiving you. When you see them, you'll have an I or a J after them. In this image, you can clearly see the difference between the ones on the left and the I on the right. I, again. On the left, you can also see the I for the letters. You can tell that was willfully done. You can tell by the I from the shape. You can probably guess what those letters stand for. Jesus, Joseph, Joshua. Jesus, Joseph, Yeshua, Obadiah, Ahoshua. The I and a J are generally interchangeable. You can also include the Y in this situation. Look at the I at the I-600. The 1 is between the 6, is bottom right sided, visibly different from the first one. Once read, it would go like, in the year of our Lord, Joshua, Jesus, year 777, instead of year 1777. The year of the Lord Baal or Bel, Anno Domini.
Unlike the clean, wholesome America you may recall, the wasteland will be a distrustful place, full of unsavory characters and few morals. Earning the trust of your fellow man is an often overlooked key to survival.
Sorry about that. Back to it. Oh, And if you're wondering why I mentioned Joshua and Joseph, that is for another video. You'll find the I and the J throughout books, maps, coins, and signs still to this day. All over the world, on the old forts, castles, streets, libraries, and on gravestones, you'll find them. Peculiar map. California separated. I'll get to that in another video. Here's a clear case with time manipulation. And yes, even the year 800 should be a question for you. How can you be sure that your Shabbat is the correct Shabbat? How can you be so sure your Passover is the correct Passover? I will make this once again clear. Forget time, even in the Bible. You can believe me when I say the biblical timeline is so off, it's repulsive once you start getting into it. What I'm going towards now, I want to ask you a number of questions. I want you to keep them in mind throughout the series. First, how sure of you are the 4 seasons? Do you think they're natural? What makes a human a human? On a scale of 1 to 7, how much do you believe that you're human? What year is it? What century is it? Lastly, when is Jacob's trouble? Keep these in mind throughout the series. Clearly someone's lying. Let's get into the story behind these buildings. Who's their architect? And so on. Behold, the Coral Cable City Hall. Clearly these buildings should have an architect. Indeed they do. His name is Phineas Pace. Date of completion, 1928. Okay, everything seems to check out. Surface level seems to be okay, but yet again we have to go further. How about an archived newspaper at the time? Surely they would have remarks on the City Hall, right? Library of Congress. They most definitely would have something. 1770 to 1963, Harold Stewart, Phineas Prince, Ice, City Hall. And nothing. As in literally nothing. Different phrasing, nothing. Remember, this is their prominent city hall. Alright, maybe just search for the city hall instead. 10 results, pretty good. Straight to the first news article in 1925. Today, when Miami has a population of 100,000, Carl lies only 30 miles from City Hall. Huh? They mentioned that the City Hall was there even though it was completed in 1928. 14 years later, and finally they write another article about again this prominent City Hall. 14 years for a City Hall. No articles of a city planning and or construction, by the way. As if it was, there already. Yet if we can't get any information on the City Hall, besides those articles, how about that Phineas persona? Wikipedia has almost nothing. Back to the Library of Congress, maybe they'll have something. He is an architect, right? Surely there'll be multiple articles of it. Of course. What does it say? Phineas Space is a superintendent. Huh. At this point, the joke is pretty much beaten. It's clear that someone here is clearly lying. Okay, how about the other architect, Harold? Back to the Library of Congress, 1770, 1900s. Harold Stewart. Honestly, what do you expect? But what's this? As per usual, the orders. Footprint in the snow. I mean, look at that date, 1926. Things should start making more sense now. It's quite clear someone is clearly lying. Next, the Ohio-Cincinnati Arch. Let's get straight into it and find out who the architect is. Oh, nothing. Charles Edward Hannaford. Absolutely nothing. All of Ohio, by the way. Nothing. Wikipedia? Nothing. Here's something someone found about him. Charles was born in 1860 and the building was completed around 1883. He was 23 years when he drew up this. 23 years old. Unbelievable. How about we look at the Samuel and Hannaford and Sons group? Charles was a member after all, as this group is the one that's responsible for the construction of the entire structure, quote unquote. The first prominent mention of Samuel Hannaford and Sons was in 1896. 1896. That date far extends the complete construction of the arch. If the cutting stone method were applied, and each stone had to be carried from this supposed quarry, knowing now that on car it takes 1 hour and 13 minutes, give or take, would you honestly believe the constant annals when it said these structures' blocks were carried with donkey and horse carts? Even if I didn't tell you how these stones were made, the narrative for this is just so false. So false that it's kind of funny when you really think about it. How about we keep following the trail of this group, per se? The Washington Courthouse and Jail. Huh. This is the first receipt for this courthouse in 1899. The reason I bring up this particular company, because they keep appearing, yet there are no real results of them being architects, or of having a quarry for these specific projects, or having a documented construction crew. But of course, the narrative states that the copper-colored slaves built them. Well, the last part is tongue-in-cheek, of course the slaves built them, but not in the time period they are stating. Another one they built. Monroe County Courthouse, Ohio. It's the fourth courthouse building on this site, with the two of the previous ones destroyed in fires. A narrative you will constantly see. Of the annals of these buildings, there are a number of strange things that generally happen to these buildings throughout the states. To be specific, fires on fires. Once you go down this path, you will realize how many fires, how they ripped apart, built on top of, and replaced with cheap wood. And if you're questioning, how can stone be burnt? Maybe, just maybe, that narrative is also false. Once you start brushing the surface off of these stories, of these fires, you should notice a pattern of wars and their armies being instructed by their nation's government to destroy the buildings for whatever reason. The other side of that story is of the local state government. They would conduct acts of sending demo crews to blow up these structures. And if they couldn't destroy the building, they either abandon them or are forced to use them. I repeat, forced to use them. Why, you ask? Why willingly wreck these buildings just to put up wooden and concrete buildings, or nothing at all? We'll get to that. Just know, those world wars, the real reason for them was the destruction of the old buildings across Earth, sealing off the passages, and stealing as much tech and resources for the new start of things. It's as if a confederacy came about to make abundance of hilarious fake stories. They have taken a crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance. Notice the tabernacles of Edom, Ishmael, and Moab, and the others. I'll get into those nations in the next episode. I'd like you to remember this quote. 24, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. All Africa is black and tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusively to newcomers, wholly so, and in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, Swedes are generally what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of the white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scourging our planet by clearing American woods, and on and on and on, that should make you really think. Most people do when they encounter this quote from, yes, Benjamin Franklin, the president. Benjamin Franklin, the runaway slave. Wonder who he's running from? This brings up a seriously disturbing question. Why is the population so full of pale people today? Every person you see here, you more than likely know about. Yet the description of every person here is being described as swarthy, to the point of almost looking Nubian in a sense, or similarly having a copper skin color. Take a long look. I'll start off with Daniel Webster, U.S. Secretary of State under President William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, and Millard Fillmore. Captain Ebenezer Webster, father of the godlike Daniel, the great Constitution expounder, whose statue stands among the side that of Stark in yonder hall, and whose name is writ with his high on the scroll of fame. How little these men could have thought that this sublime portion awaited them, when Daniel, a younger lawyer at Portsmouth, on his way to the courts in Concord, and Stark, living in the retirement of his farm, met at the old hotel in Hooksett, and the hero of Benchington spoke of the sale of himself at one time for the £40, and was ready to believe Daniel was the son of Captain Webster because of the same deep, swarthy color of his face, only blacker. Encyclopedia of World Biography. Daniel earned the nickname Black Dan for his dark skin and black hair and eyes. Life of Daniel Webster by George Ticknor Curtis, 1870. Mr. Webster's father inherited from her the bachelor complexion. Her other sons had the Webster characteristics. The same division of parental traits took place in Mr. Webster's own generation. He himself said that of his 4 brothers, only one was dark like himself. The other 3 ran off into the general characteristics belonging to the name. In fact, however, I have understood that his own brother Ezekiel, who was represented as a model of manly beauty, although his complexion was not so dark as Daniel's, had black hair. He has a complexion, as General Stark said of him, which burnt gunpowder will not change, and a heart, as his great son said of him, which he seemed to have borrowed from a lion. John Marshall, American politician, 4th Chief Justice of the United States. Marshall served as the United States Secretary of State under President John Adams. The life and public service of Chief Justice John Marshall. Indeed, in his whole appearance and demeanor, dress, attitude, gesture, and sitting and standing or walking, he is as far removed from the idolized graces of Lord Chesterfield as any other gentleman on earth. His head and face are small in comparison, but his height, his complexion, swarthy. The muscles of his face, being relaxed, make him appear to be 50 years of age, nor can he be much younger. Eulogy of the life and characters of John Marshall. His figure says, Venerable kinsman, I have now before me. He was about 6 feet high, straight, and rather slender, of a dark complexion, showing little if any red, yet good health, the outline of the face nearly a circle, and within that, eyes dark to blackness, strong and penetrating, beaming with intelligence and a good nature, an upright forehead, rather low, was terminated in a horizontal line by a mass of raven black hair of unusual thickness and strength. John Greenleaf Whittier was an American Quaker, poet, and advocate of the abolition of slavery in the United States. found in the life of Daniel Webster. On his father's side, he was descended from the Bachelors, a dark-complexioned, dark-haired family from whom the poet Whittier was supposed to be descended from. His two descendants, Webster and Wifter, who are said to have resembled him and somewhat each other in striking appearance, would seem to indicate a preponderance to genius in the strain. They both look the same. Interesting. Yet the slave narrative still appears. Webster's had the dark eyes, hair, and complexion of the back elders. Interesting. This next piece will be from Frederico Bremer. He has a good exterior, a figure slender and tall, a beautiful head with refined features, black eyes full of fire, dark complexion, a fine smile, and a lively but very nervous manner. I know from my own experience what this nervous bashfulness caused by the overexertion of the brain requires, and how persons who suffer therefrom ought to be met and treated. She's clearly familiar with Whittier. Dictionary of American Biography. Whittier was a tall man with piercing dark eyes and a swarthy complexion, and was somewhat vain with respect to his appearance. You probably know this person, Abraham Lincoln. Yes, the president. I'll get right into it. From Lincoln's own autobiography, he self-describes himself. If any personal description of me is to be thought desirable, it may be said I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly, lean in flesh, weighing on an average 180 pounds, dark complexion, with coarse black hair and gray eyes. History.net, Lincoln the Homely. His complexion is dark and shallow. Robert Louis Stevenson. You might best know this person for Treasure Island. Stevenson was actually born in Scotland, believe it or not, in the 1880s. Invisible Heroes, 133 Stories You Were Never Told, by Roy H. Williams. One of the high points in Sam's life came when he was introduced to Robert Louis Stevenson, the celebrated author of Treasure Island. In a letter home to Susie, Papa Sam described him thusly. He was mostly scantily furnished with flesh. His clothes seemed to fall into hollows as if there might be nothing inside but the frame for a sculpted statue. His long face and lank hair and dark complexion and musing and melancholy expression seemed to fit these details justly and harmoniously. I can go on, but I think you get the point. Now you're probably asking yourself, who are these guys? They in no way match the description. Exactly. Columbia University Libraries, page 3 of 8923, page number 005, exterior 7th Avenue, facade from corner 31st Street. I want you to pay close attention to this photo. Do you see it? Should be pretty obvious. But if you don't, where are the shadows for the people? Why are some of the people transparent? It's as if they were inserted into the image. You see, you'll probably see the image on the right, but that image is a composite of multiple images. On the left, you can see. This one should be pretty obvious. Australian photographer Frank Hurley formed this composite photograph from 3 original negatives of World War I Belgium. Sometimes they'll just straight up paint people in. Back at Columbia University, awkward. Easily able to take out the sky. Remember, these are passed off as being completely real, or rather as unedited. It turns out Photoshop was a thing even in the 19th century. Are you surprised by this? I hope you can see what I'm leading to right there. Those people in those previous images I provided, they clearly weren't what was being described in the biographies. Yet today, we see, well, these guys. Made by Dexter's Press. Interesting. Dexter's Press Inc. Over 100,000 subjects are listed with a local firm, one of the world's largest manufacturers of picture postcards. Of the endless variety, postcards made by Dexter and used by travelers to fulfill their writing obligations. Apparently they did photo retouching and piecework. I think you start to get the point when I say that these people seem to be appearing out of nowhere. Not to overextend the point, but I'll come back to this situation a little bit later on. It'll make so much more sense then. If you want to truly understand how demented these people are, here's an example. Ever heard of Sarah Richter? Probably not. This person is supposedly one of the richest colored individuals about 100 years ago. Understandably, quite a number of people don't know this person. Sarah was born in 1902 near the all-black town of Taft, located in the eastern portion of Oklahoma, in what was the Indian Territory. Ignoring all of that, I want you to keep a close eye on that picture from before what they present. Yes, that photo with that small child on the right.
home in Kansas City.
Yeah, that home on 12th Street still stands. She was our city's first black millionaire, but her family members say some of her story told for years isn't completely true.
This is Aunt Sister Sarah Rector's obituary.
This story you're about to hear
My fondest memory was the farm.
is a whole different animal.
She had chickens, cows, calves, and stuff like that.
Remember them geese?
So the geese chased us.
Yeah.
But
This flock of sisters
Wait a minute.
sat down with me to separate fact from fiction about their aunt.
They should know the truth.
yeah,
They should know the truth.
they should know that all the pictures that's out there of Sarah Rector
Are not her.
Sarah Rector.
Right.
Last week, we told you the story of Sarah Rector, the first black millionaire in Kansas City, at the time the youngest millionaire in the country. One of the many descendants of slaves or freedmen born before 1906 given a land allotment in Oklahoma, where a driller hit a gusher on Rector's allotment.
There was also a real danger to freedmen living in the area.
Historian Diane Houston says that's a big reason why the Rectors packed up and moved to Kansas City. Sarah's mother, Rose Rector, bought this house on 12th Street. Houston says as soon as the oil was discovered, rumors and inaccuracies started flowing just as freely.
So we always know this. You can't always trust everything you read.
And then they had it also that she was an orphan. She was not an orphan.
She's not an orphan.
And said that her father died in prison. And it also had, which is not true.
And get this, Houston and Rector's nieces tell me there's a picture of Sarah Rector at the Smithsonian. That's not her. So how come no one said anything?
Even when we were kids, my mom and them knew that wasn't her, but never leave it alone. Just let them talk.
Rector's nieces say Sarah and her mother and Sarah's husband all lived at this house on 12th Street, and eventually
She had a house on Lock Ridge.
Rector's family members say she just about bought up the entire block. She also owned a house across the street, an apartment building down the street, and she liked the finer things in life.
She lived a life of luxury. She had money coming in, and she did whatever she pleased with it.
I remember the fancy cars she had, the big fancy Cadillacs. I remember that. I remember her coming to the house and they played cards and they'd sit around and they had fun. They would close Emeryburg there downtown because we couldn't go in there and try on clothes. Yeah. But they closed it down for her to come and shop.
There were many layers to Sarah Rector, and while some of what circulated online is false, she was never an orphan, she wasn't abused or living on a dirt floor. Family members say what is true, she played hard and she loved hard.
Most of it's like she was a party girl. She loved the party, entertain, and she did. But the flip side was she loved her family.
The Washington Post, World's Richest Negro Girl, inspired media ridicule, fascination, alarm. Sarah Rector was 11 when oil was discovered on her land in Oklahoma in 1913. Her sudden wealth became the object of racist news coverage. Deborah Brown grew up calling her Aunt Sister, and she remembers her storied life through the haze of the childhood in segregated Kansas City, more than half a century ago. There were the fancy Limbos, Cadillacs that ferried young relatives to school and out for barbecue, the white-owned department store that opened its doors just so Sarah Rector could shop, the rolling farmland where Rector would invite Brown's mother and the children for the family gathering. Brown, then a grade schooler living in a two-bedroom house with 3 siblings. Her parents and her grandmother marveled but didn't dare ask. "We're from a generation where you don't spread family business," said Brown, a very fit-looking 72-year-old with a short afro seated in the lobby of the Hampton Inn in Bowie, MD. Her mother, Rosa Richter, would simply say, "Aunt Sister can afford to do that," Brown said. That's the way she would put it. She can afford it. She never said she was rich. It wasn't until Brown was in her late teens, after Richter died in 1967, at the age of 65, that Brown realized Aunt Sister had indeed been rich, historically so. For the first time, Brown heard the word oil. Oil made Pick a Nitty rich. Layered the headline in the Washington Post, which described Richter in 1914 as an orphan, crude, black, uneducated, yet worth more than $4 million. The truth, at the time, Richter was living with both her parents in a two-room cabin. She'd yet to become a millionaire, crossing that threshold at about 18, with oil earnings that would be worth $14 million today. The sensationalism that dogged Richter in her youth has continued long after her death, in a role not unfamiliar to descendants of the historical figures. Brown said she finds herself constantly playing a whack-a-mole as journalists and academics replicate earlier eras. She said with a sigh, "It sometimes seems like a losing battle." The most vexing bit to Brown, the black and white photo of the somber-faced girl, with pigtails wearing a dark plaid dress. It has appeared on the cover of an award-winning book about Richter on the Facebook page of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington and elsewhere. Demented. We'll get back to these photos in a bit. Remember when I said to keep the Roman and the Greek in mind? Here's a particular verse some people like to overlook when dealing with this supposed New Testament. "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How say thou, ye shall be made free?" Yahushua answered them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever commits sin is the servant of sin." Huh? You, a normal person, would say that's a lie. Yet it's coming from these older jakes, and they know their history. In addition to that, the response Yahushua made makes it clear that it's true, as he didn't deny it, or boldly say that's a lie. Rather, he goes into it being in sin, or breaking Torah, hence being in sin. Ever wonder why the Romans, the book, remains a chapter in the Bible? What if I told you a couple alternative words for Akub or Jacob or Roman Greeks? Let's get into that. First, before any of this byword nonsense, one of the many curses we have to deal with, let's get into this Greco falsehood about a particular character these Edomites like to prop up. The medieval empire of the Israelites, Robert Gresham and Vladimir. An obvious antiquity, but it shows only that not only various events, but also the names of their heroes were replicated and referred to in the distant past, according to the historic cycles and Anatoly Fomenko. In history textbooks, it emphasizes that the time of Alexander the Great was noted by many important achievements in the Greek literature, science, philosophy, and art, and it is connected with the creation of such prominent thinkers of antiquity as, for example, Plato and Aristotle, and generally then. A significant phenomenon sprang up in the history of ancient Greece, which was called the Hellenic period. It is acceptable to examine it as the expansion of the Greek culture in the countries conquered by the Macedonians, Edomites. The 15th century AD is in no way distinguishable from antiquity in this regard. The fall of the Byzantine and the Greece and the formation of the Ottoman Empire caused the Hellenism of the medieval era, which is well known in history, to spread throughout all Europe. Fernando Giovannius writes, "From the moment of the fall of Hellas, the story of the Greeks is split, one into their enslaved motherland, and the other into exile. They came to resettle in the strange countries in masses. The West accepted them hospitably. Their religious atrocities found refuge in the capitals, in the educational institutes of Italy, bringing the Greek literature here anew. Everything is correct except the word anew. There was nothing new. Everything was for the first time, and that which is ascribed to antiquity is a duplicate of medieval events and personalities. A duplicate of even Plato. Supposedly it is known of traditional history that Plato was the greatest representative of the idealistic school in ancient Greek philosophy. He created the Academy, a school of philosophy in which his students were united. The notion of ideas became the base of Plato's instructions of the eternal and unchanging image patterns of things, the weak reflections of which are the subjects of the real world. It is thought that his instruction died in order to reappear several hundred years later in the famous Plotinus 205 to 270 AD. His name, it is clear, is an absolute accidental and practically identical to Plato's name. Then a Platonicum, again for the same reason, dies. In order to be reborn as early as the 15th century in the teaching of Platon. He is also Plato and also a famous philosopher, writer, and public figure. For the fullness of the picture, let us say that Plato's ideas appear out of nowhere, for the first time in particular in the 15th century. At the high point of Platon's activity, and that Platon organizes in Italy, in Florence, Platon Academy, an exact analog of the ancient Platonic Academy, and the fact is of the interest that Platon writes Utopia, and that Plato, and also a treatise on laws, following in everything his own ancient predecessor. The author of the treatise Law, at the same time, the Platon of the 15th century, also the ancient Plato, promotes the idea of an ideal state. The traditional historians know all this too well. All the examples cited by us have been taken from their own works. It would seem that the conclusions suggest themselves. The ancient Plato is a duplicate of the medieval Platon, and no, it is impossible to violate Scaliger's chronology, and therefore Plotinus and Platon are declared Neoplatonists, and that is, the followers of Plato. Development of art in the 4th century BC reflects the new phenomenon of Greek society. It is said in the solid works devoted to antiquity, Greek sculpture knows many prominent masters, Scopas, Diochares. Their works supposedly have been found as a result of various excavations, just by accident. The travelers bring them to museums, and merchants sell them. Travelers who, heaven knows by which routes, have obtained these antiquities from some sort of unknown second-hand dealer. But here is the trouble. From time to time, it turns out that some of the other works are counterfeit. From century to century, skilled craftsmen are discovered who work like the old days in order to earn their daily living. A great number of books have been written about the counterfeit industry. No less fascinating than the detective stories of famous writers. At that, they tell only about these cases when counterfeits have been discovered, and how many have not been discovered. There are only several subjects. We already have talked about the origins of the series of ancient sculptures. Even the great Michelangelo sinned with counterfeits in his youth. He created a figurine of Cupid, and at the suggestion of a friend, as well as an antique original. The forgery presently was, and it goes on. Skipping forward, one would like to emphasize that practically in all the chronicles, which were spread both geographically and on the scale of time, two great political figures are reflected. Let us call them conditionally conqueror and reformer. Although these figures are merged into some variants, the personality of conqueror has been duplicated many times. Here is an incomplete list of his reflection. The ancient Egyptian Ramses II, Alexander the Great, Diocletian, Justinian, Charlemagne, Ahasuerus. Details of this unusual biography are repeated in a number of descriptions of the other figures of the past in the ancient Egyptian writings. In a conqueror's biography, a pair of figures often exists, father and son. For example, a pair of Macedonians and a pair of Ramses. It is possible that there really were two of them. Questions immediately arise. Why are they multiplied on the pages of the chronicles? And why are they called different names? We shall recall again that all the names cited above are not in the least name, but nicknames. We now proceed. Let us assume the word Charlemagne as the name of the concrete ruler. But as a matter of fact, it only means great king. They were able to call any ruler a great king, and if we then identify one particular individual as Charlemagne, then this is only on the strength of the historic tradition. No one knows how his parents really named him, and apparently one will never know, because it was not the custom in those times to give a man the same name from birth to death, in which connections these nicknames in of themselves also sound differently in different languages. And here appears in one place, let us assume King Charles, and in another the Pale, and not every reader by far understands that this is one and the same man, because Trolloras is also the pale in another language. Therefore, we also have designated the first emperors of the first empire in the world by the words conqueror and reformer. As regards the doubling of their figures in different chronologies, this happened as early as after the collapse of the empire, when the chroniclers and annalists of the newly founded states wrote a supposedly ancient and glorious genealogy of the new sovereigns. The history of an empire which had gone out of existence served them as an abundant source of raw material, full of interesting events. It was possible to draw facts out of this, and to embellish these as much as fantasy or experience required. We have seen this in the writing both about ancient Greece and about ancient Rome, and about even the old ancient China. It was extremely easy and simple to do, inasmuch as we have been emphasizing constantly that there were very few educated people counted in society, and one more reason for doubling conqueror and reformer, as to all the people on earth possess both positive and negative qualities. Moreover, their actions were recognized as fine ones in one epoch were considered reprehensible in another epoch. As we can see, the blatant attempt to try to subvert reality by pushing individuals back in the past who were never there. To Darius of Sicily. When in ancient times a pestilence arose in Egypt, the common people ascribed their troubles to the workings of a divine agency. For indeed, with many strangers of all sorts dwelling in their midst, and practicing different rites of religions and sacrifice, their own tradition observances in honor of the gods had fallen into disuse. Hence the natives of the land surmised that unless they removed their foreigners, their troubles would never be resolved. At once, therefore, the aliens were driven from the country, and the most outstanding and active among them banded together, and as some say, were cast ashore in Greece, and in certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danius and Cadamus, Danites from the tribe of Jacob. Ah yes, Cadamus, also known as Cadamus, is also believed to be the founder of the first king of the Greek city, Thebes. He ranks as one of the first heroes in Greek mythology. Interesting. Along with the likes of Perseus, we'll be getting to this person, Perseus, later on though. Also Hercules. Anytime you hear Phoenician, it normally means Danite. If you ever hear someone say Phoenician, more than likely they're racist. But the greater number were driven into what is now called Judea, which is not far distant from Egypt, and utterly uninhabited. The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and for his courage, on taking possession of the land he founded, besides other cities, one that is now the most renowned of all, called Jerusalem. In addition, he established a temple that they hold in chief veneration, instituted their forms of worship and ritual. Mike M. Joseph, Middle East Blueprint for the Final Solution. The tribal emblem of Dan contains the image of a snake, full as is the seal of the Dan depicted, an adder biting horses' ears. He quotes the famous Judean writer Ibn Ezra, quote, as saying that the emblem of Dan was an eagle with a dragon or a serpent in its claws. Here's an excerpt of the letter of the Judean high priest taken to Sparta by the Judean ambassador, who write, Jonathan, the high priest of the Judean nation, the Phora and the Senate and the people body of the Lacedaemonians send greetings when in former times an epistle was brought to Onias, who was then our high priest, concerning the kindred that was between us and you. We both joyfully received the epistle because we were well satisfied about it from the sacred writing. Yet did not we think fit first to begin the claim of this relation to you, the glory which is now given us by you. It is a long time since this relation of ours to you had been removed, and when we, upon holy and festival days, offer sacrifices to Elohim, we pray to him for your preservation and victory. You will therefore do well yourself to write to us and send us an account of what you stand in need of from us, since we are in all things disposed to act according to your desires. Josephus relates the king Aries and his Danite people kindly received the Judean ambassadors and made a decree for friendship and mutual assistance. He then sent the high priest's epistle to his Danite people. Another historian, Stephanus Byzantine, shows that both Alexander Polyester and Claudius Solus also affirmed a direct kinship between the ancient Spartans and the Judeans, and in quote-unquote crisis day, the Judeans, thinking of their dispersed Israelites among the Greeks, asked, where does he, quote-unquote Christ, intend to go? Since he told them, where I am, you cannot come, and we shall not find him. Does he intend to go to the dispersed, or Gola, among the Greeks, and teach the Greeks, or the Danite Spartan Greeks? John 7:3-5. These Danite Spartan Greeks migrated later towards their new homeland in Denmark, Danmark, Mark of Dan, and Ireland. Much later, some of their Danite musicians and songwriters composed songs like the famous The Lundering Air, also called Danny Boy. Let us now read some interesting quotes from the celebrated Irish author Thomas More in the history of Ireland. It had a good reason to leave the main body of Israel and travel to Ireland via Greece. A large group of the tribe had formerly migrated out of Egypt shortly after the death of Joseph, some 200 years earlier. The Bible adds a bit of information concerning the Danite migration, while the main body of Israel was still in the wilderness, and the reason for such forced migration, of course, possibly also other Israelites. In the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 20, 21 to 23, we read, notwithstanding, the children of Israel rebelled against me, did not walk in my statutes, and also raised my hand in an oath to those in the wilderness, that I would scatter them amongst the Gentiles and disperse them throughout the countries. Though the Elohim did not choose to record such dispersion in the book of Moses, biblical evidence and history gives us some clues about this happening. A second contingent of this Danite tribe leaped out of Bashan during the period of prophetess Deborah. Soon we shall find out who these Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of Dan, were. The well-known 19th century ethnologist Dr. Robert Gordon Latham was certain that the Greek Danans were descendants of Dan in his Etymology of Europe. He says, neither do I think the eponymous, or the ancestral name, or the Argive, Danai, or Argos in southern Greece was other than that of the Israelite tribe of Dan, confirming that the people of Dan must have had close connection with their brethren in southern Greece. He concluded, yet with Danai and the tribe of Dan, this is the case, no one connects them, and it goes on. I'll get more into Dan later on in the second part, but Dan is being troublesome and are very large. They're pretty much spread out almost everywhere. However, now, anytime you hear Greece, knowing now that a lot of people are projecting themselves back in time to say that they were the ancient Greeks, just know, more than likely they're talking about either the Danites or Edomites that are being projected back. Onto that Perseus thing and Hercules thing I was mentioning, the Danube by B. Holland. In summary for this page, the Argives are generally referred to for, well, being Danites, yet another 1800s byword for us. To sum it up, if Licinius, the first named king of the Danites, be taken as the first generation, then Proteus is the third, Perseus the fourth, the kings of the time of the Trojan War, respectively the 6th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 13th. So by now you should pick up that for Hercules is, well, as I told you before, Samson, as these people who are effectively, well, even us, for ourselves, are worshipping our own past biological male self. Anacalypsis, Attempt to Draw Aside the Veil, Language, Nations, and Religions, Volume 2. Chapter 1. Saxons. I shall in this chapter submit to my reader some observations relating to the ancient Sak of Tartary, or northern India. We have seen that one of the most common names of Buddha was Sayak, the name of the Lama of Tibet, and Sak and Saksak. From this name of Buddha, it was the tribes who inhabited an extensive country east of the Caspian Sea and North Tibet were called Sak by the Potilim. This was the hive whose castes are yet found in the west, called Saxon, having, as Dr. Gids say, the Hebrew language. They were the Belgic Saxons of Gaul. One of their capitals was Susan. They were called Susan by the Welsh, Sakon by the Scots, and Sathanak or Saxon by the Irish. They are the people said by Herodotus to be the same as the Scythians, another byword. Dr. Sackler maintains the whole of Europe to have been occupied by the Saxons before the arrival of the Celts, but they were, in fact, both tribes of the same people. Scythians, Celts, Saxons were successive castes or swarms from the same hive. The word Sak is the same as the Hebrew word sik, imaginary, and siko, contemplate, and the Greek, in short, mind, constantly confounded with wisdom. The Roman officer called Sargat, who was the sacrificer, and the Hebrew Sargon or Sagan, the assistant or the advisor of the high priest. From this came the word silt, Sakalite, the names given to Joseph in Egypt, and the meaning of which I apprehend was wise man. Joseph was called a savior, and this word is the same as Salas and Salatus. The barbarian who marched from the north and plundered Jerusalem was a Scythian or Tartar or Tartar. He was called Shishak. This is nothing but Saxon or Sassanak. Tat is the name of Buddha. Mohammed was called a Sak or Saksora, as well as a Ikramiyaditya. These are all merely descriptive epithets, and from the fact named above we find the reason why the Mohammedans spared the statues of Buddha in India. It strongly confirms the doctrine of the secret religion of the Mohammedans. Muhammad was thought to be a renewed incarnation of divine wisdom, and of course of Buddha in his 10th avatar. In time, the pharaohs of the Egyptians had a class of person called the sages, or wise men. Considering that the Saka means Buddha, the god of wisdom, I cannot much doubt that the Irish Sagan, a priest, the Scandinavian say Saga, the Hebrew, a noble or a great man, are the same. The heathen Irish had their Sagan, like the Tyrians and the Chaldeans. Boreas gives the epithet of Sagan, Augustine to Noah. There is scarcely a corner of the earth where the doctrines of wisdom may not, as a mythos, be found. My learned friend, E.C.B. de Salvert, has clearly proved that. By the sagas of the Scandinavians and the Book of Wisdom are meant, the word saga being the same as the French sagaeus and the Latin sagax. From the same author, it appears that razunus can be nothing but children of Ras or wisdom. Thus it is evident that to speak of the Sak or the Saxon was the same as to speak of the Buddhists. It was a general name, as we call many sects or Catholic or Protestant Christians. From this their sacred books were called sagas, as we call the books of Indian Vedas, or in fact Buddha, or books of wisdom. This all agrees very well with the learned language of the Kashmir or the Kashmir, having been Chaldi, and its account for Dr. Giddis having found their language to be Hebrew. The Norwegian kings were called Hakwin, but this is but Hakim or Kim, and the substitute for the Judean high priest was Sagan, closely allied to these in the Hebrew root Kesp, an enchanter. Kesp is literally two words and means wise, and as, that is, as a wise person. Anciently all priests were physicians and were called Hakim, but this was always conveyed with its sacredness character. This is all the keeping with their gods Odin, Woden, Thor, with the Badwas, Frigonaris in Wales, and the Old Man Buddha in Scotland. All these came with the first or the second tribe of Saxons to the north of Germany and to Britain. Strabo says all the tribes eastward of the Caspian Sea are called Scythia, the Day, next the Sea, and the Siak, the Saki, more eastward. But every tribe has a particular name. All are nomadic. It is in its attention to this which causes all our confusion. We have here the clans of Scotland and the tribes of Bedouin Arabs. The Sak, pronounced in transcript like or Saki, have made in Asia interruptions similar to those of the Cimmerians. Thus they possess themselves of Bactria, and the district of Armenia called after them Saxenia. This word, I believe, is only Saxanan, country of Sax. I have no doubt that when nomad tribes were driven out of the land which they loosely settled, they passed, like the Israelites from Egypt, through countries occupied by other tribes in search of new inhabitants, till they could go no further. Then a desperate struggle took place for possession for the extreme country. The Saxons arrived in Germany and Britain from countries from the most remote. Saxon words are either Hebrew, Chaldee, Arabic, or Persian. Just so you know, not Anglo-Saxon, but Saxon. The Anglo-Saxons are, quote-unquote, very recent. Forbidden Histories of the Americas, Daniel Lowe. To this day, thousands of unusual artifacts remain hidden in the basements of museums across this land with no explanation as to why they cannot display them without the threat of losing their funding. It would seem that of every claim of who came to this land first, all seem to forget that when they pushed their way onto the beaches of the New World, someone was peering at them from the bushes. Although not the first to come to this land, Europeans, Hebrew, or Judeans, or Roman Judean people have been coming to this land as early as possible, 900 BC, and even then, some were already here. Columbus knew this, and so did all the others who followed him and preceded him. And those who funded the expedition, who were the people, and how did they get here? Is there a written history of these people? Another group of people who had migrated to this land in the past and likely arrived here in the West prior to the previous mentioned Pueblo people are those whom we will call Roman Judean colony, which is one of the history's best kept secrets. These people likely mixed with the earlier mentioned Pueblo people, but the Roman Judean people arrived here in the West about 100 BC and thrived for nearly 400 years before they were defeated by the enemy, known later as the Toltec. Any people who even appear to look like the Pueblo people, or the mixture of which are the same DNA, were for the most part vanquished, exterminated, or assimilated. These people returned again to this continent in the 700 AD and thrived until they were overthrown by the Toltecs, and a mixture of the previous and the remnant of their own near 900 AD. These people and the mixture of those of the most ancient remnant of the Anisi eventually became part of the Azteca. It gets very confusing in these days due to all those who came to this land, mixed together, migrated together, with others going in different directions, and some of the original even migrating back to the old world. The Azteca Chinapa is not necessarily unique to Mexico. There are several cultures around the world still to this day using basically the same concept. What I found interesting is there is a trail of them that seem to be along the likely path taken by the Nephite, the Roman Judean colonies. I had suspected for years of the time I had played with the idea of the basin area of northern eastern Utah retaining a lake having been fed by underground rivers that are more abundant under our Utah mountains than any geologist will admit. It is my belief that this lake existed from the days of the crucifixion to about 900 AD, when another earthquake mentioned by the Roman Judean colonies and the Native American legend occurred, causing the source waters to return to subsiding day by day until about 1000 AD. The old Latin maps are just too perfect of a match to this no longer hypothesis, as the shoreline is quite identifiable, existing at one level of 6,000 feet. It would seem the existence of this very striking similar lake, which science claims exists 33 million years ago, just happened to be so close to the appearance of the lake, which appears on the old Latin maps. This lake was likely documented and kept from the rest of the world by the early Roman Judean colonies. If you look at some of the maps done by the old Latin explorers, even in the 1700s, it is quite obvious they were lacking in the seeming well-guided secret of the land of Calalus or Cibola. Here are some examples of this lake shown on the old Latin map. The Roman Judean colonies and the lead crosses of Tucson. In 1924, there was a discovery of a certain artifact near Tucson, Arizona. 32 lead objects, of which most were cross-resembling those of the medieval times. Like every discovery that cannot be explained, the hoax factor crept into the find, although many knew it was legitimate, including the professionals who excavated it. The story, after 90 years, finally made it to the forensic geologist by the name of Scott Walter. Mr. Walter has recently conclusively proven that the artifacts as an authentic, confirming what many already knew. Even before Scott Walter's investigation, anyone who had investigated details of this find could not honestly conclude these artifacts were a hoax, unless of course they have an agenda to do so. The most interesting things about these artifacts are not only where they found, but the story they told, as there was a writing on several of them in Old Latin. Some also said there was a little Hebrew and Greek found on them, as well as several of the artifacts had the specific dates, placing these items having been likely abandoned by those who made them in what would seem to be the late 9th century. Many of these things found in these messages of the past can also moderately be verified by the Aztec record. The inscriptions not shown above found on the artifacts have been translated as the following. On the cross arm at the left is a profile of the head with the words Britain, Albion, Jacob. In the center, another head profile with the words Roman, Actim, Theodore. On the right, another head profile with the words Gaul, Sin, Ashral, Israel. On the vertical beam of one of the lead crosses in this inscription, councils of the great cities, together with the 700 soldiers, 8,800, Jan 1st. We are borne over the sea to Calalus, an unknown land where till Texas Silvius ruled far and wide over people. Theodore transferred his troops to the foot of the city. More than 700 were captured. No goal is taken away. Theodore, a man of great courage, rules for 14 years. Jacob rules for 6. With the help of the Elohim, nothing has to be feared. In the name of Israel, Ashral, O.L. The Calalus records speak of the Theodorus as the leader of many people who leave the Roman lands for Calalus. In 775 AD, Theodorus is none other than the Judean king of Septimania, a Roman Judean state in southern France. He is the son of the first Judean king of Septimania, also called Theodoric III, and Mary de Narbonne. Mikir, Toros. In 775 AD, Nehemiah Theodoric reconquered the American empire of Calalus. Calalus was ruled by Silvanus Teltexus, Solomon the Builder, the hereditary ruler of this. Calalus was founded in the 1st century BC by the Babylonian exile known as Silvanus Ogam or Silvanus Barbo. Solomon II, Babylonian exile, Nasi of Mar, ruler of Somerset in Britain, a great Roman Judean ruler, soldier, and ancestor of the small knights, Barber Ha-Katzin. The British Judean Rodan settled in Wales in the 12th century. Their descendants in Wales went with the Prince Murdoch ap Owen to America, where they established themselves in a series of forts in Alabama and Georgia. The Alabama Welsh website states in regards to Prince Murdoch, in 1170 AD, 10 small ships assembled off Lunder Island in the Bristol Channel, which flows between South Wales and southern England. He and his 10 ships were never heard from again. It was many years later when the archaeologists discovered the European style. Yet, this goes on for quite some time. The alternative word for a Roman you can use is Rodan, as you can see. The problem is, even this person doesn't recognize that the events are mainly happening over here. The Bibles are extensive. Edom has really done a good job in trying to subvert reality by pushing our name into many directions. This causes a Eurocentric and Afrocentric mindset, sadly. With the things that I'm going to continue going on into, you'll see how much this starts adding up. One of the things I want you to pay attention to is the number of times you will see 1800s. In the next video, I'll most definitely go further into this byword nonsense. It's pretty extensive, and I'm hoping you're realizing that most of this Jacob and Jacob warfare that's going on, if you listen closely, it sounds a lot like almost everywhere had one, or had one Jake somewhere, and they were moving back and forth, clearly aware of each other, and with the cities already being here. The question becomes, how can the children of Isaac, both Jacob and Edom, forget where they came from? Forget Egypt? The topic we're going to get into next is just going to make it even more obvious just how much effort they put into trying to redirect time and space. Black slave owners, Larry Kroger. Indeed, so widespread was black slaveholding in the city of Charleston that a majority of free black heads of household owned slaves from 1820 to 1840. When the first federal census of 1790 was taken, it revealed that 36 out of 102, or 35.2%, of the free black heads of the family held slaves in Charleston City. By the 1800s, nearly 1 out of every 3 colored heads of household were recorded with slave property. Between 1820 and 1840, the percentage of slave holding heads of the family ranged from 72.1 to 77.1%. In 1850, however, the percentage of black heads of household owning slaves was a modest 42.3%. The existence of black slaveholding in Charleston was so visible that a northern visitor to the city commented that a number of free blacks and owning slaves themselves. This may seem strange to northern people, especially to the class who cannot understand nor appreciate that the system of labor known as slave labor. As free black community prospered, even the marginal blacks acquired the means to purchase slaves. In 1854, Rebecca Switten, a 44-year-old black woman with no reported occupation, somehow obtained the money to purchase a 50-year-old slave named Mary for $100. Elsewhere in Charleston City, Joseph Maxwell, a black fisherman, owned 2 female slaves whose ages were 38 and 6 years old. In 1850, the only property owned by the majority of the colored masters was human chattel. For the most part, free blacks of wealth, as well as those of marginal status, acquired slaves and thereby contributed to the high percentage of colored heads of family who owned slaves in Charleston City. It appears that throughout most of the antebellum period, the majority of the urban black slaveholders were females. In 1820, for example, free black women represented 68.2% of the heads of the family, as well as 70.7% of the slaveholding heads of colored dwellings. In Charleston City, the female heads of black families dominated the black slaveholding community. In 1850, the number of black women who owned slaves was reportedly at 123 by the federal census. 123 by the federal census. Yet only 68 black men owned slaves in the port city. By 1860, the gap between female and male slave owners gradually decreased, and within 4 more years, the number of male masters surpassed the number of female masters. The great preponderance of free black women who owned slaves. One reason for blacks not reporting their ownership of slaves was their kinship ties to their human chattel. For example, John Morris, a free black and a wheelwright of Charleston City, purchased his 2 daughters, Roseanne and Caroline, from Josiah A. Payne for $300 in 1843. In 1849, after Morris brought these 2 girls, he purchased his wife Grace and their son Joseph from William B. for $500 in 1851. Rather than tell the census taker that his wife and children were slaves, he simply stated that his loved ones were free blacks. According to the 8th federal enumeration, Morris's household consisted of his wife Grace Morris and their 4 children, Rosanna, Caroline, Joseph, and Peter Morris. Although he reported his family as free persons of color, he still paid the city tax of 5 slaves. Like John Morris, some other free blacks refused to consider or refer to their family members as slaves. As a result, few of these colored slaveholders told the federal censors marshals that their kinsfolk were slaves. For the most part, when you hear white, replace it with more. When you hear the term black, replace the term with Native American, Pacific Islander, or Chino. All Jakes for the most part. It's only recently are we now associating pale with white. More on that later, as black and white are simply social status, or like a social security number. For the book we just looked through, the slave owners in that situation would be non-Moors, in this delusional context, or European. To even believe quite a large portion of this, you have to believe in slave ships, even if there are no slave ships in any museum. Instead, we have Viking ships, or rather Danite ships. You can look that up if you like. I'll get into the situation in the next video, but I'll leave these thoughts with you for this part of the video. Remember in school how they thought that women of slave masters would cover their hair? Yeah, the other biological males really loved the straight black hair of slaves. Yeah, most of them were from India. Yes, East India, the Americas, South China, and the Pacific Islands. Now today, examine the many that are straightening their hairs. Cringe. And yes, I know, technically the short curly hair, the fro, is in fact the original and the correct strain for Jacob, or Akub. Mentioned that one of the Solomons had a slight bit of gold hair in terms of hair texture because of his mother. The destruction of Rome, the fall of Akub, the dead phoenix. With everything I just brought you, my brother, you're probably wondering if every place you examine had some biological copper-colored child of Abram or Brahma, why are there so many pale people, and where did all the children of Isaac go? I'll first start this segment off with asking you a question. Do you feel safe? The reason I ask you this is because most people don't recognize we are actually in Jacob's trouble. Most of the supposed events in the recently made New Testament already happened. Side note, that's for the next video. I'll give you it in the simple popular context. I want you to look at these maps of Africa with new eyes, knowing what the Confederates of Edom are attempting to do. Africa about 200 and 400 years ago is not the same Africa you see today. Africa a short time ago was a matter of fact. Antarctica likewise had tropical climate. Yes, tropical climate. Yes, today we are just that down bad. Africa had many rivers and many large cities, just like the Americas. However, through the Confederates' narrative and attempts to push Jacob's trouble sometime in the near future, in addition to not knowing the true children of Isaac, this willingly leads people astray. Ever heard of petrification? Of course you have. One of the consequences of instant petrification of living organism is sand, quartz sand. Keep that in mind. Yeah, all the sand you see is just pure death. Just like any other Roman or Jacobean colony, this North Africa had to go by all means necessary. The destructive climate and outward earth-wide disasters, the sun and beyond, turn all the earth into burnt toast. You'll see it once you know and understand what you're looking for. In addition to numerous disasters, Rome's fall was evident. As of today, I wouldn't trust the continent's current positions on any modern map. In addition to the Confederates' other attempts, I can tell you with certainty, we are not safe. I am honestly surprised to this day that we are alive, but of course, with the information I'm going to next, it should really start making sense to how we are, quote-unquote, alive. I want you to watch this first before we even start this section.
Excuse me, doctor, but what is impossible? What is impossible, doctor? Mononuclear reproduction. Oh, doctor. Cloning. What if I were to tell you that I could take a scraping of skin from your finger and create another Ezra Lieberman? I would tell you not to waste your time or my finger. Anyway, that is cloning. It was first done with plants. A cutting taken from a plant and transplanted grew to be the exact duplicate of the donor plant. Now we are doing the same thing with laboratory animals.
You mean you can produce an animal from itself?
We take the unfertilized egg of an ovulating female and destroy all of its genes and chromosomes. We then implant the nucleus of the donor cell, which could be taken from a blood sample or even a skin scraping. That cell, with its genetic material intact, eventually becomes an embryo and is born as a living creature.
Without parents?
Well, it has no father because the egg was never fertilized. No mother because its genetic code comes from another being. Can you follow that?
And this creature is an exact duplicate of itself? Oh, Doctor, how can that be?
Here we are removing the eggs of a white rabbit from the fallopian tubes. Now, you see the egg under a microscope. I've brought the point of an ordinary sewing needle into view to give an idea of size.
They are that small?
Most mammal eggs are about that size.
Including human eggs?
Yes. The next step is to destroy the egg nucleus with ultraviolet light so that none of its genetic makeup remains. Now, you see an egg from a white rabbit ready to be injected with the blood cell from a black rabbit donor. With the injection pipette, one of the blood cells is sucked up and then injected into the egg. After a few hours, the eggs in culture divide and are ready to be put back into the female. There they grow into embryos, which in a month's time, the normal gestation period, they will become baby rabbits. In this instance, a black litter from a white mother and their black collar proves that they have been cloned from the blood cell of a black rabbit.
But isn't it difficult to get the egg back into the female?
Transferring the eggs isn't a problem. We do that all the time with laboratory animals. The really tricky part is the microsurgery. Getting the donor cell into the egg. You're lucky if 1 in 10 survives.
And this can be done with humans?
If the surgical technique were precise enough.
It's monstrous, Doctor.
Why? Wouldn't you want to live in a world full of Mozarts and Picassos? Of course, it's only a dream. Not only would you have to reproduce the genetic code of the donor, but the environmental background as well. Let's examine the family background of the donor. His father is 65 years old, a civil servant. The mother is 42, you said. She dotes on the child. Boy. The boy is pale, dark hair, blue eyes, spoiled. Right? Now, Mengele would certainly know every social and environmental detail would have to be reproduced. Plus, if the parents were divorced when the boy was 10, this would have to be arranged.
Dr. Büttner, the one who is cloned, the donor, he has to be alive, doesn't he?
Not necessarily. Individual cells taken from a donor can be preserved indefinitely. With a sample of Mozart's blood and a woman, someone with the skill and equipment could breed a few...
Not a genius who would enrich the world, but a lonely little boy with a domineering father, a customs officer who was 52 when he was born, and an affectionate, doting mother who was 29. The father died at 65 when the boy was nearly 14. Adolf Hitler.
Interesting, right? That was The Boys from Brazil, 1978 film. Remember, these groups of people aren't from these locations. Now let's read from First Enoch, a fragment of Noah. And after some days my son, Methuselah, took a wife for his son, Lamech, and she became pregnant by him and bore a son, and his body was white as snow, and as red as a rose. The hair of his head as white as wool, Diadema, beautiful, and as for his eyes, when he opened them, the whole house glowed like the sun. Rather, the whole house glowed even more exceedingly. And when he arose from the hands of the midwife, he opened his mouth and spoke to the Elohim with righteousness. And his father Lamech was afraid of him, and fled, and went to Methuselah his father. And he said to him, I have begotten a strange son. He is not like any ordinary human being, but he is like the children of the angels of heaven to me. His form is different, and he is not like us. His eyes are like the rays of the sun, and his face glorious. It does not seem to me that he is of me, but of the angels, and I fear that a wondrous phenomenon may take place upon the earth in his days. So I am beseeching you, begging you in that order, you may go to his grandfather, Enoch, or father, and learn from him truth, for his dwelling place is amongst the angels. Everyone, all the children of Adam, the Adamites, all had that ruddy, copper-colored skin. They all had the same G phenotype, except the children of the supposed fallen, and the ironically cursed children of Cain, to which a mark was placed on Cain, so everyone could know what he did. In addition to that, the curse was passed on to his children, that is, the blinding snow-white skin. Coincidentally, the same curse was applied to the quote, modern Canaanites or Atlantean that were in Canaan or Canada. That same Atlanteans that Quetzalcoatl, Ahoshua, Joshua, Amun Ra had to exterminate or kick out of Canada. Ancient race of white giants described the Native American legends from many tribes. More on that in the next video. Yellow hair is a curse if you didn't already know. Most people seem to avoid this scripture like the plague. Knowing all this, one cannot simply lose their phenotype out of nowhere, no matter what mundane argument these fools make, with the exception, of course, being full-body genetic modification. The many standout features of knowing that these people are in fact imposters is the ability to identify the time period that came to be. If you pay attention to the books and articles I mentioned throughout this video and the next, you should notice a pattern of one obvious year, or rather a time period, the 800s or the 1800s and upward. It's quite jarring when you actually start paying attention to it. Again, I would like to re-emphasize, the last 500 years were hell on earth. The population so greatly decreased after the death of Jacob, the Rodans, the Romans. What better way than to bring in some fresh blood? Literally. Ah yes, the narrative still fails to point out that most people are still supposed to be colored, yet all you see are sadly pale faces. It's an unavoidable statement, and any conscious mind avoiding the topic are simply compromised. So let's get to the truth, shall we? Chemists will be only daddies someday. It's prediction. Bosses will order employees by certain plans and specification. Britain believes test tube babies would be much like nature's own, unable to think. T. Rhodes, General Secretary of the British Association of Scientists, he believes that there will be little difference between the man born of woman and the man compounded in the test tube. We are just on the threshold of the discovery chemists are making. Rhodes said, we have almost finished with analysis. We are passing on to synthesis, the building up and the making of new and valuable product out of meaner ones. The speculation is therefore almost forced upon us that in this time we will be able to create the living material. Professor Leop, years ago in an American university, announced that he had succeeded in artificially fertilizing the eggs of a sea urchin. That was an enormous step forward. We know that man, the mostly highly complicated of all living things, we know that the protoplasm, that wonderful substance which is the very basis of what we call living things, is made up of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. We know the way the atoms were arranged someday in the laboratory. Some chemists may accomplish the union of atom in the same way. He will then have a created protoplasm, thus causing life to manifest itself. Perhaps it will not end there. Something like man, having produced protoplasm in a chemical laboratory, perhaps man will discover some process now unknown to us by which we can incubate and nurse, as it were, this substance so as to produce even more complicated forms of life. Finally, we may produce a living, moving being, something like ourselves. The dreams of the ancients are to be made to come true by the moderns. Okay, on to the next thing. To do the dirty work. Suppose then it were possible in 1,000 years from now for a chemist to produce synthetic living things. Okay, we're done with this guy. Bold, isn't it? Who even thinks like that? Oh right, people with detailed and fully planned out agenda. But we can do better than that. Canadian Lancet, Volume 15, 1883, April. Baby incubators. There were giants in the earth in those days, and there shall be giants in the earth in these days, to be seen not in sideshows merely, but on every hand. That is, if a reporter which comes from France to be true, and it is well vouched for, and if the giant babies are the making of giants and giantesses, all will admit the importance of a good send-off. It is just as essential in raising men and women as it is in raising any kind of stock. Blood and scientific management are no less potent in the one case than the other. Indeed, it would be a great blessing to mankind were some of the ideas acted upon by the raisers of good stock imported into the more important businesses of raising a superior race of men and women. The working out of the law of the survival of the fittest would receive fresh impulse. Much sickness, pain, and sorrow would be averted, and the sum total of man's happiness would be immeasurably increased. But no such luck is in the store for all. The human race, the weak and the sickly no less than the strong and the healthy, will continue to produce after their kind. Man's twofold nature is an insuperable barrier to enactment of civil laws, restricting to any considerable extent the natural law of reproduction. Economic and social consideration will always outweigh consideration having regard to the welfare of the prospective offspring. All the science of government can do in the matter is to educate the masses into a more perfect knowledge of physical law. But to return to the subject, Dr. Tanner, a French physician attached to a founding hospital, reports surprising results from certain recent experiments. This gentleman is said to have been grieved by a large number of children under his care, who perish within the first 6 months of their life. While in this mood, a new idea occurs to him. If French chickens, he asks himself, can be raised by artificial means, why not French babies? He caused a box to be made, having glass sides and resembling an ordinary chicken incubator. It was furnished with a soft bed, placed in a dark room, and kept at temperatures of 85 degrees Fahrenheit by means of hot water. In this baby incubator, he placed one of the infants, a miserable specimen of the crying, clucky kind. The children was provided with a nursing bottle and of course only fed at regular intervals. The child ceased his crying on the second day, much to the doctor's surprise, and never again cried for the space of the 8 weeks. A tenant, the incubator. At the end of this period, it had the appearance of a healthy child of a year old. Encouraged by his success, Dr. Turner repeated the experiment with like result. He then, with the permission of the hospital authorities, proceeded to construct an incubator capable of receiving 400 children, and in this he placed all the children in the hospital, 360 in number, all except 2 remained in incubator. 6 months when they had to be removed, having outgrown their narrow beds, where it is now that the facts are vouched for by a commission of 12, who made a report to the government. The results claimed might be deemed incredible. The average age of the infants when put into the incubator was 8 months and 3 days, the youngest being 12 hours, and the eldest 11 months. The average weight of the 360 was 10 pounds. At the end of the 6 months, the average weight was 84 pounds, and all are said to have looked like children 8 years old. As much was accomplished in 6 months by the incubator as is accomplished in 8 years of ordinary life. The infants were not only large but also strong and healthy, and most of them walked within a week of leaving their nest. The results was astonishing and exceeded Dr. Tanner's most sanguine expectation. It is now expected that every child in the hospital go into the incubation business, so that we shall probably witness a likely competition in business of raising giants. If this child incubator is a good thing in founding hospitals for hospital babies generally, it ought also be good thing in all homes blessed with babies. Doubtless we shall soon witness a new industry started under the fostering care of the national policy, and presently baby incubator agents will be as numerous as sewing machine agents. It would be great to enlarge on the practical value and suggestiveness of Dr. Tanner's experiment. Eye-opening how bold some of the older ones were. You see, one of the initial problems the first batch seemed to have was infertility. Take, for instance, the mailman legally shipping babies. But it gets worse. Remember the first video I showed you? Remember how it mentioned using eggs of even animals? Those things aren't what you think they are. They're more like salmon eggs. Ironically, salmon is one of the GMO fishes out there, running on, or rather swimming around. While this may seem like a one-off occurrence in the making, there is a reason why this verse is a thing. Deuteronomy 20:16-18. But thou should utterly destroy them because of their abominable acts. Yeah, that group was into some pretty hardcore chemistry and alchemy. For instance, the ebony shade of people you see, generally Hamitic, are known well in their own words. This also includes the pygmies of Africa, known to have mixed with giants. There is no way to get that skin tone or height without genetic modification, as the Adamite's skin tone is the ruddy copper skin tone, in addition to the fact that the known curse for skin is lack of melanin. Matter of fact, our Elohim seems to curse so many people with it, it must be some kind of inside joke to him. Take, for instance, the paperback test. While it may in fact seem racist amongst the older jakes, melanin levels an age ago of being too dark more than likely means your biological dad was more than likely pounding a, to be politically correct, modified Hamite. This ends up with a situation such as this. Songs of Solomon 1, The Bride. I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. As the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry at me, they made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. Now ironically, we have a group of persons telling us we need to be a certain copper complexion to pass. I'm telling you, this entire situation is just an over-embroidered joke our father plays on us. Ever seen a pig? Such a strange creature, right? What if I told you you can grow a human in a pig? What if I told you can turn a pig into a human? Wild claims, right? What if I told you pigs are man-made creatures for cleaning the battlefield? They are really mysterious creatures until you realize what the hell you're looking at. Georgia Genesis challenges evolution, links humans to pigs. Geneticist Gene McCarthy. Pigs used to conjure filth and greed, but after years of research into this species, McCarthy sees a kindred spirit in pigs, according to his hybrid hypothesis published last month on his website. Helped create humans by mating with chimpanzees. As radical as it sounds, not to mention a coupling that many of us would rather not visualize, McCarthy is also following the steps of scientists like Galileo, who risks derision to revolutionize how we understand our world and how we got here. McCarthy has offended evolutionists and creationists alike, and even had a rabid comedy sketch aired on live night TV. Extraordinary theories require extraordinary evidence, and McCarthy does not disappoint, wrote Hewitt. Rather than relying on genetic sequence comparisons, he instead offers extensive anatomical comparison, each of which may be individually assailable, but startling when taken together. Science currently supposes chimpanzees to be our closest living relative. McCarthy believes humans evolved from an original pig-chimp mating, likely a female chimpanzee and a male pig, followed by several generations of back-crossing. In other words, the offspring and descendants of that pairing, like Tarzan, lived among chimpanzees, but unlike Tarzan, McCarthy says they mated repeatedly generation after generation with chimps, becoming more and more like chimps and less like pigs. McCarthy's been working on this theory for decades. Pigs and primates. Pigs and primates. Pigs and primates may be closer than we thought. The similarities between humans and pigs. You're a pig, it may be a common insult, but interestingly, there are a number of similarities between humans and pigs. Both pigs and men share hairless skin, albinism in the eye, protruding noses, and heavy eyelashes. Pig skin can in fact be used in medicine because of their compatibility with human organs. Pigs and primates. Another interesting thing about pigs only became pale and hairless after being trapped in domestication. You can look that up. Another devious thing many of these people did, or continue to do, many doctors in recent history, and even today, like to cut the central parts of babies, specifically hermaphroditic babies, forcefully deciding the sensual organs of the child. Why did I bring that up? Well, many of these doctors do the same thing for tails. A lot of people like to hide the fact that they have tails. Next, DNA. A very simple way to identify a clone is their DNA. A clone's Y haplogroup generally has R, R1A, R1B, L, L1, L2, L2A, O, and OM175.
Ever had. We're so different than them. Our teeth are shorter than theirs. Their teeth are wider and longer. Their canines are longer than our canines. Their hydrochloric acid inside their stomach is hotter than ours.
You talking about white people?
I'm talking about white people. They produce an acidic enzyme in their mouth. We produce an alkaline enzyme in our mouth called amylase and amylose and trypsin. They can break down proteins and meats. Our stomachs can't break down proteins and meats because the pepsin and the hydrochloric acid doesn't get hot enough to break it down. They digestive system can go through something called putrefaction. Or can't. Ours go through something called fermentation. A lot of them grow tails. Their hair grow towards the earth or towards the ground. It curls and it grows towards the sun. We have high melanin content. Inside of our melanin, we have something called selenium. They have low melanin content. Inside their melanin, they have something called ammonia. And they have a high sulfur concentration inside their cells. And that's why when they get hot, when it get hot outside, they get colder, or if it get cold outside, they get hotter. That's why you can see a white man running in Daisy Duke shorts. Or when they get hot and they get around water, it changes and the sulfur mixed with ammonia, and it gives off this actually canine smell, and that's why they say they smell like wet dogs. You see, this is all scientifically proven.
Fun fact: most northern East Indians are actually Japhetic Tears. While they may look like Jakes, the real Jakes are in Southeast India, with their swartier complexion. A Tear, if you didn't know, is a person with a maternal lineage from Abraham, but a paternal lineage from a biological male from Ham or Japheth. They essentially look like a Jake, or have some kind of mother or maternal lineage in their DNA. Yep, there are a lot of Tears walking around us. Here's the Philippines in 100 years. modern times. There are still a number of jakes over there, by the way. Another fun fact. Those bees you see flying around with the yellow jack in them? They are GMO bees. They produce an acidic honey. The real bees are the Jamaican black bees that produce an alkaline honey. Just to rub in that the dead reality we're living with. Also notice how hard they are trying to defend certain things, such as bananas and bees. Now you should also question how many animals and plants are actually biological. Remember, days of Noah, as I told you at work. So what can we deduce from an outsider's perspective about this new population? 1. A clone admixture. 2. A canine admixture, likely a dog, no offense, because of the hair, the tail, and the mannerism. 3. A pig admixture, the pale skin and the other organs. 4. A primate admixture, skeletal structure, tail, likewise to use Neanderthal excuse to say that they were there before. Likewise, they're not Caucasian, isn't cursed with a snow white skin like some Canaanites, but primate pale skin. However, it is to be acknowledged that more than likely, rather than being primates, the individuals with full recessive traits are more than likely wild man mix. But of course, we can go deeper. So far I've been railgunning Gina, Tia, and Ember. Now we move on to Jamaica, Alaska, and Sandvik. Let's get into the topic that most people truly fear. We acknowledge in our personal counsel what a biological male is. I have doubts you truly get what I'm saying. A biological male has a strong, broad, square jaw, pronounced chin, high cheekbones, deep sunken eye sockets, bushy eyebrows, a sloping forehead, pronounced eyebrow ridge. The ability to grow a beard. It's noted that too little Atlantean DNA can cause a lack of a beard, a small head, an Adam's apple, a wide neck. Most importantly, a wide wingspan for the shoulders. These shoulders must by physical law be extended far over the hip bone and be capable of holding 3 of the person's heads on said shoulders. Long arms past the hip bone, the male organs, large hands, extended middle finger. Important, small hip bone, incapable of childbirth. Side note, keep that in mind. Adonis belt, trapezoidal compact butt muscle, flat broad back, large knees, big feet, and extended big toe. Basically a walking upside down pyramid. A biological female has a oval head, triangle chiseled chin, lower cheekbones, large eyes, unsunken eye sockets with the skin, thin clean eyebrows, a non-sloping forehead, a large head. Keep this in mind. A thin neck, longer neck in general. Most importantly, rounded shoulders matching the same width of the hip bone and is incapable of holding 3 heads on the shoulder. Short arms, small hands, wide hip bone capable of childbirth, curved back, vertical pronounced butt muscle, female organs, and small feet. Basically an hourglass with 2 legs. I have to remind you, the rule of the upside down pyramid and the hourglass can't be broken. It's physical law. Now that that's out of the way, let's start railgunning, shall we? This is their perspective. The creation accounts in Genesis are of utmost importance when discussing gender relations within the church. Genesis 1:27 states that Elohim created mankind in his own image. In the image of the Elohim, he created him, male and female. He created them. Verses 28 goes on to say that Elohim blessed them and spoke to them. This is the first mention of mankind. It is important to see that male and female are mentioned and that the blessing that was bestowed on them. The Hebrew word used for mankind in verse 27 is Adam, which refers to humanity as a whole. We don't see the proper noun Adam used until Genesis 4:25, So this common noun refers to the whole human race. One thing that is important to note is that the Hebrew language does not contain a gender-neutral pronoun. Therefore, the word mankind was used. Many commentaries do not refer to Genesis 1 in the formation of their doctrine unless it is to make the announcement that the Elohim created Adam first, not necessarily acknowledging the fact that the more accurate definition of Adam would be humankind. Egalitarians find Genesis 1 to be very telling of the Elohim's heart for equality because the verse makes it clear that both men and women were created in Elohim's image after he blessed them. Yet again, we find that the English word rib used here doesn't adequately depict what was taken from man. The Hebrew word used is zela, which often means a component, or more often a sidewall, alternatively a chamber, indicating that more than simply a rib was taken. Many scholars believe that the entire female essence was removed from man and fashioned into a woman. This would mean that the mankind in chapter 1 could have been an unidentified or androgynous person, with the blessings of male and female being a declaration, anticipation of the separation of the sexes in Genesis 2. The woman then brought to the man, who said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." The Hebrew words used for woman and man here are ishasha and ish respectively. This is the first time that a specifically male reference is made, and it happens at the time of the creation on extraction of woman. Up to this point, the more generic Adam was used. Instead of pointing out differences, I think the man was actually pointing out similarities. They were both two of the same kind and suitable for each other. Man was identified as woman, as of himself. Now you know how they think. Let's see if it holds any radium. First thing, remember when I told you that the moon was a recent creation? This may seem out of the blue, yet you'll immediately catch on. In ancient writings and traditions, one can find proof of a time when the moon did not exist. Democritus and Anaxagoras mentioned that there was a time when no moon could be seen in the night sky. In describing the history of the Greek region of Arcadia, Aristotle writes that the Pelagians lived in the area since very old times. At that time when the moon did not exist, Apollonius of Rhodes mentioned a time when not all the orbs were yet in the heavens. Before Dani and Deculion, races came into existence, and only the Arcadians lived, of whom it is said that they dwelt on mountains and fed on acorns, before there was a moon. Plutarch wrote in the Roman Questions there was Arcadians of Evaders, following the so-called pre-lunar people. Similarly wrote Ovid, the Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Jove, and the folk is older than the moon. Hippotulus refers to a legend that the Arcadia brought from Pelagus, or greater antiquity than the moon. Lucian in his history Astrology says that the Acadians affirm in their folly that they are older than the moon. The memory of the world without a moon lives in the oral tradition amongst the Indians. The Indians of the Bogota Highlands in eastern Cordillera of Colombia relate some of their tribal reminiscences to the time before there was a moon, in the earliest times when the moon was not yet in the heavens, says the tribesmen of Chipchas. You can look up the many theories scientists have over time trying to define how the moon just so happened to be there, and how it baffles them, how quote perfectly it lines up with everything. What the hell does this have to do with androgyny? You see the verse above, Genesis 1:27, the Elohim said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And the Elohim made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Notice again in verse 16 that the colon, he made the stars also. Why is this in this verse, when in verse 14 it already mentions lights in the firmament? This is one of the first introductions to man-made inserts. Anytime you see a colon or a semicolon in any verse after the point is an insert into the text. Not to mention the fact that it is already noted that there are multiple suns. the multiple atoms on that point, they are correct. Today, the modern men are only now noticing the fact that there are multiple suns. Here are a few examples. Sometimes you need a filter just to see it, because the sun is blocking it out. Take for instance the Rahu Sun event of 2017. By the way, the Rahu Sun event is normally just referred to as an eclipse in modern times. Since the modern men are told, or rather they hold the moon beyond our posts, keep that in mind, they give her the capability to overtake the sun, causing what is now known as an eclipse. Problem is, the moon has nothing to do with the sun going dark, hence the 2017 eclipse. In many areas throughout the states, the moon was nowhere to be found during the 2017 eclipse. Multiple people reported this, yet somehow the sun was still being eclipsed with another perfect circle. Take for instance this channel. Back in 2017, for like a day or so, the moon was not in the sky. This person literally waited day and night to see if the moon would appear. Here are some examples of the eclipse. As you can see, nothing's eclipsing it. No moon, nothing. But the sun, of course. At the same time in Aussie-land, the moon was visible while the sun was up. Back to verse 16. Someone's been tampering with the text. I can go into the books referencing the sun also not being there or not fully formed, and people acknowledging this, but in a later video. Maybe. Just know that the Bible has been heavily edited. When the Elohim is talking to his wife, Wisdom, in verse 26, he's planning on making multiple biological men, just like lights and the suns, as a man is the equivalent force to the suns, hence the children of the sun reference. As in verse 27, he clarifies he's making man in his male image, while however in flesh, hence the biological male now looks like his father, but is held within female flesh, as all flesh is female. All flesh. Keep in mind, everything beyond the colon is an insertion into the text. There is no quote, male and female created he them in verse 27, just created he him. Yet why do I bring this up? The question really becomes, was Adam's first physical clay-like state the correct state to be in? The answer is an obvious no. It's clear the Elohim and the Elohims had other spicy intentions. Now with all this said, is there androgyny involved with creation? Yes, matter of fact, the biological male is androgynous. If you're confused, female and male is an in and out, off and on situation. As I mentioned, all flesh is female. Flesh is easily malleable once you know how to. Just think of the many holes on your skin, through your body. Are you radiating blazing light like the sun? Nah, we are like 70% water and electrolytes, easily manipulatable by geomagnetic lodestones, ley lines, cold weather, hot weather, or whatever mundane, effeminate thing that bothers us. The further we go back, till around the year 1800, the more biological male jakes become. Likewise, further back we go, the more chickens we find. Likewise, we notice a bunch of beardless men, beardless jakes, I should say. Yet even showing this, most jakes today will fight you to the grave and back about being original, yet are without a doubt genetically altered. What makes this worse is the fact that they know they are modified, and would absolutely avoid talking about it to a broad-shouldered biological male. Outside of the code words that they aren't the natural ones they so virtue signal to be, I cannot express to you how many clueless brothers, or even quote Gentile biological males, are unaware of their surroundings. Real gunning time. Why don't we take a look at our modern Jake, shall we? That's kind of strange. Maybe a one-off occurrence. Okay, I'll get to the point. If you were to check the vast majority of quote-unquote male jakes today, they look oddly like women, and not just oddly like a woman. They seemingly match every trait. Look at their shoulders. Do their shoulders go broadly past their hip bone? No. Do they have a big head in comparison to their shoulders? Yes. Are their shoulders sloping downward? Yes. Do they have deep, sunken eyes, even with the skin? No. Burton wide hips? Yes. For the most part. Short, stubby T-Rex arms? Yes. We'll get back to them. Let's move on to the others. Okay. Everything seems... Never mind.
You can wear your dresses. Nobody has sat here and said, if you're a man in a dress, something bad should happen to you. I don't believe that. I believe people should live and do as they want. But I think it is wrong for our society to keep perverting things, to keep putting in the forefront forms of perversion. It is perverted to me. I do not like. Personally, I kind of like the outfit he's wearing. I mean, he looks stupid, but he doesn't look feminine. He kind of just looks like he's in a different century, and I think it looks good. He's giving me Henry VIII meets Michael Jackson, You Are Not Alone vibes. I'm digging it. I would wear it, Harry. I love you.
Enough jokes. Shoulder width over the hip bone. Yes. Small head. Being able to fit 3 heads on their shoulders. Yes. Deep sunken eyes with the skin. Yes. Strong jawbone. Yes. Strong chin, sometimes double chin. Yes. Bushy eyebrows that they constantly shave? Yes. Constant hairy skin that they shave off? Yes. If you watch their stomach region above their hip bone, do you see a concave shape? No, just a solid V shape. No actual hips because the shoulders are past them, right? Yes. Lastly, this one will be harder for you to personally identify. So practice. Do their cheeks look like biological females? No. They are trapezoid from behind, flat on the arm side, and look compressed like a male's if you understand the biology I mentioned before. Arms span past hips? Yes. And lastly, flat, broad back? Yes. Now think for a second on the behavior of these chickens, now evolved T-Rexes. Remember the constant chatter from the Rexes about how aggressive most black women are, knowing fully well that this scripture exists. Just so you know, I have come to the conclusion that almost all T-Rexes are pure evil. Yes, even your closest friends. Almost. Let me reemphasize. Take for instance what I just mentioned about not being effeminate enough. Notice how hard pushback from these quote modern chickens about this topic is to the point where these female Rexes are going to other J countries such as Vietnam or the Philippines to get effeminate wives, knowing fully well that effeminate men from Jacob perpetuate these biblical curses and cutting the seahorses from the future kingdom, all just so these chickens or Rexes can remain maimed and somewhat male in their eyes. Did you know that quote black men are mainly the ones to marry outside the J race? Before I go into this, let's head back into DNA to further build upon your foundation. Genetically, a male passes by his Y haplogroup onto his son. Genetically, a male passes his Y haplogroup onto his son. Biblically, this is also correct. The problem is, they aren't men. If you ever wonder why the Ashkenazi says based on your mom instead of your dad, the T-Rexes would have you believe it is because they come from some distant maternal relative of ours. But of course, T-Rex love twisting their narrative. The real reason Ashkenazi are saying this is none other than being correct for once. For most of us, our mom is our dad, or rather a second dad genetically speaking. This causes a problem when looking for DNA studies, because the Rexes end up basing their pseudoscience on recent regions, such as Africa or Europe. If you didn't already know, biological women only provide a phenotype, a face type, a preset basically, nothing else really. And with all the things I have shown you with the cells, they are only really needed, well, for the eggs honestly, if that. This goes back into the point about these T-Rex mass dating outside the J race and creating legions of tears by basically selling our phenotype, furthering the problem. While however most Hispanic, black, quote-unquote women are the most loyal. Now when you really start looking at it, who in the majority are the heads of these churches, preaching on how, quote, women shouldn't be preachers? Who are these corrupt politicians in our community all over Earth? Who are in the gangs terrorizing the neighborhoods? Who are the main ones getting X'd by said gang violence? Who are the ones lowering the property value? Who are the ones pushing the drugs? Who are the ones filling these jail cells willingly or not? Take a look at these pictures and tell me we aren't being played. Who are the ones mass shipping tears into the world? Who are the ones doing the human trafficking and exploiting? Believe it or not, Jakes or tears play a key role in all the trafficking. Who's mass shipping Jakes into this terrible world without remorse? Who are the main ones encouraging for biological males and horses to cut their hair and beards? Lastly, who are the ones mass spreading sensual diseases? There's a reason the HIV and AIDS rate is so high, and specifically the J community, from South America all the way to Canada, or in any other continent. If you were to go and ask nurses the sad constant stories of horses, quote, giving birth to only realizing that the T-Rex gave them an HIV, bro, it's really bad. And it's bad because these T-Rexes can't live with the fact that most of them are incredibly gay.
Where's the plumber at? In there?
It's the only thing I've been on that's got a problem with it. They supposed to be a Christian, but they got a problem with gay people. How you gonna be Christian?
So because of your sexual orientation, you're requesting protective custody, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Bye, little Josh. I'm gonna f you too. They trying to let me suck they.
A lot of niggas be acting tough as shit, go to jail, be on straight gas shit, niggas are old. Perfect example, Lil J.
Man, what? Get that thing, but it's whack.
That nigga pussy, man, that nigga fat, man, that nigga fuck boys.
I need to go to exclusive and buy a mask real quick.
And I ain't being funny, I'm dead serious. I came back, I asked that's in jail. I got people in jail, man. Y'all better act like y'all don't be hearing about that shit. Y'all bogus on came back, nah, a lot for real. Y'all act like y'all don't be hearing about that shit.
The situation here is that many of these super tough on the block girls are merely just actresses, but behind closed door, they are going hard in each other. What's even worse is that they aren't even looking for biological males in a sense. They are looking for other T-Rexes to smash or get smashed by, while at the same time being anti-gay to the point that they would fight you if you expose them in public, or do everything to avoid contact with you. But when they go to jail, you should hear the stories. This group of Rexes are gay. The other group are the super straights, the ones that look for biological men. Biological, effeminate men. You know, the ones with the long hair and that tuck? To them it's no different than dating these horses. And honestly, that's not incorrect. They would smash each other or the tuckers on the side, then pass the STDs to their quote wives or girlfriends, and now more than ever to their ex-boyfriends. Bro. Well, let's move on to the seahorses for a bit.
Just to remind you, if you are into the recently made New Testament, seahorses by this logic are cut off from the kingdom to come for being effeminate. One of the many things that seahorses do is bait you into believing that they are biological women. They do this by lumping biological men with T-Rexes in the claim that they, quote, hate black women. If you don't date a Jake seahorse, you hate black women. How many times have you heard that? It's next level psychological warfare. Remember, these are the Jakes that would practice these androgynous energies. They are a hard focus on this. This also includes the non-Jake horses as well, were the main ones encouraging the trans movement in the community. The trans movement that mainly only targets biological men. Trust me, if you ever look up trans videos, it's almost always a biological man. Never really a T-Rex turning into a girl or a seahorse back to a male. The funny part is, now they are complaining about men entering their sports, always trying to get broad-shouldered, copper-skinned biological males to generate some kind of emotion. Another psychological attack they do is to basically force T-Rexes into a male-driven mindset, and they clearly are failing at it and will continue to fail at it. Just to remind you, the curse that Eve suffered, now the seahorses suffer with, it was placed onto Eve because they coincidentally found out how alchemy worked. Through sensual alchemy, they learned how to ferment, or rather how to steal a male soul, necromancy for a male child, and spirit for a female child, since the female is void, hollow, without a son or soul, forcing an unnatural form of creation outside of, I'll say, or Elohim's laws during that time period, by eradicating a biological male's sensual cells, creating the concept of death in their world, now ours. Eve's attempt at filling her void or womb, and that serpent said unto the woman, "Ye shall not surely die." So no, when the phallic serpent with his dangling fruits say never die, he knew that the earth, flesh would become perpetual death cycle. That you're going to live forever but through death and reincarnation. The old Kenites or Atlanteans knew fully well how to inject the male cell into the female cells, even if they were animals. Side note, greatly advanced by the way. Blend and mend and create all manner of things, yet the paternal line still remains in their DNA after creation. Hence again, ironically, the same thing that the Canaanites and now Jakes and Edomites were practicing in mass before the fall, or modern quote brothers now have to deal with in terms of monthly cycles and C-sections because they can't push out a baby because their hips are just not wide enough for, well, childbirth. I wonder why. Ever heard of the Rosicrucians? If not, just know that they are a famous, practiced order of alchemical brothers. This particular brotherhood wanted to inform the average colored about the secrets hidden in plain sight. They, now being trans, formed into the modern gang we see today. Of course, the gang goes back to the Knights Templar, and the Knights go back to the Prester John, David and his many sons, such as Solomon. Solomon is just a title. There are a number of Solomons. Sounds like a fish, I know. Before the Davids, the gang goes back to the Levitical priesthood, and before that, Joshua, Ahoshua, the one with the 12 disciples. You know, the one that caused the sun to stop? Ahoshua, Amen, Ra. The one people pray to, and alongside the mythical Moshe, Moses. The Knights Templar took the name of poor knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, or the Templar Knights, after the Crusades, as the law of the Nestorian David gave out to get rid of the Mohammedan Jakes was still in effect. They were donated large sums of gold and other wealth, so much so you could literally call them the bank. Besides this outward Jake-on-Jake warfare, the real goal is the ability to make gold via chemistry and alchemy. They were both working together, by the way, in addition to attuning to the quote true enlightenment. But of course, let's look at them truly. The priests you see here are men in dress, but rather dresses, female dresses. That one looks oddly similar to something. Maybe if I put this side by side, you'll start seeing it. Remember, these are the Knights Templar. The Templars practice, let's say, castration rituals. Hence the crossed legs. Basically, the Elohim has given most seahorses today exactly what they wanted. You know, all these Jake's behavior and mannerism really remind me of something. I just can't seem to put my... The Knights were accused of worshipping an idol. Remember, 99% of these paintings are whitewashed. That's right. But what exactly are you watching in these images? Right back to Canaanite activities. Ever heard of the goat men? How about the devil? Most people don't realize the goat people, or the devil mentioned throughout history, are mainly all Edomites. Yeah, there is no devil. That's just a made-up story the Catholic, or rather the Levitical Church made. Satan simply means adversary. Whenever you see images like these, for the most part, whenever you hear devil worship, it should not translate to Edom worship. Now you can see the same image on most modern jigs. Ever heard of how many children many of our great-grandparents had, and the excuses that they made for having them? If a couple passed, the others would make it into childhood. Remember now this image. Fun fact, most female porn stars are actually trans, not horses. Trans. Industry secret. Seahorses and their trans counterparts wear high heels to make their backs and butts curve. Most TV cartoons depict non-biological people, such as the big head, big eyes, no shoulder females. Biological females are banned from appearing in movies unless naked. Most T-Rex become undressed in movies in comparison to their seahorse counterparts. Jake T-Rexes and their trans counterpart take so much steroids that they go bald. One of the side effects of taking it for them. Most T-Rex take steroids to get beefy. Industry secret. One of the many reasons their beards look so well sprouted as well. Opera singers can shatter glass because they have a biological male diaphragm. In the past, they would cut prepubescent males so that they can sing at such high notes. Wingspan. The wingspan of a male angel, a seraphim. Yes, if you date a seahorse as a biological male, you are in fact gay. You know what's funny about this situation? Is that we are ironically back in literal Kemet, Egypt, dealing with the same Edomites that took over the Egyptian Empire, the group that forgot who Joseph was. What's strange is that many people at the time suspected that many Greeks would go to the Canaanite or the Atlanteans. Mind you, this is before that short 100 years of indentured servitude, and practice the Canaanite or Atlantean ways. The Edomite pharaoh Ramses at the time then decided to do the exact same thing that has happened for the past 100 years. Throwing babies to alligators, and the indentured servitude, the work system for money. The Danites left, and the Levites saw what the Hamites and Edomites were planning before they did, and left Egypt, southern American states. Again, work system, not slavery. They very much could have left. They wanted to be enslaved. They wanted to be enslaved. Even after this mixed group left, they went directly to Canaanite ways, to which some of them had to be X'd by an earthquake. Then the others couldn't even enter Canada or Canaan, which again proved the Edomites and the Egyptian suspicions were in the fact correct, which is really sad. We're now dealing with the same group of jigs that are obsessing with the whiteness of the Canaanite skins, and now the paleness of cloned flesh. Never forget this situation.